Live from Malcontents World Media Headquarters. And it's your hosts. What are you called?
Boobs a lot?
You can't script it, folks. You can't script it. Oh, wait, we have comments and stuff.
Is that your laptop doing the echo?
Yeah, that's mine.
All right, we got
What's
that
up,
fixed.
everybody?
We have sound. We have lights.
Actually, let's ask everybody. Do we have sound?
No,
Do
we have sound.
Well,
If we have sound, they have no. If we have no sound, they have no ears.
Mr. Malevolent, come
Mr.
on.
Malevolent.
Okay, so we must have sound because we heard my ridiculous intro. Yes, okay, we have sound. Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
What's shaking?
Thanks for joining us on a Sunday early evening. We had a few weeks break, and we didn't want to wait another week to do it on Saturday, and Joe had something to do yesterday, which, if some of the little cryptic messages that you've given me today are any indication,
Shotgunning beer at
you
4
must have a
a.m.?
raging hangover right now. And,
Actually, I don't.
oh, okay, good.
I did pretty good. I'm getting better at stuff.
What stuff?
Abusing my
Pray
body.
tell.
I'm getting better. I have new tactics.
Oh,
And
tactics.
strategies.
Tactics, strategies.
Yeah!
Well, I wish you the best in whatever endeavor that you're applying your tactics and strategies to.
You know what? Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that.
Hope you guys and girls are all feeling it out there. And wow. What a week, what a month, what a year. What a day to be alive.
We're headed into the fourth quarter, man. I think we're in the fourth quarter.
Q4, baby. Q.
Are we?
What's Q?
Are we down? Are we tied up? Are we ahead? It's fourth quarter. Is it tense? What's happening?
Well,
Chime in the comments. Let
don't-
us know what's happening in your life.
yeah, I don't even know.
I don't know.
This is the, we try to do the show every 2 weeks to make sure that we have something to talk about. When we go, turns out when we go 3+, there's too many things have gone down to try to encapsulate. It's
Right. Yeah.
I'm just like feeling overwhelmed right now. Going into the show, and plus trying a whole new rig.
I can't wait for you to explain this shit to everybody.
It kept me so busy that I couldn't even keep my thoughts straight about what is going on out there, except things are going on. Things are going on. One of the things I wanted to do for the show and I didn't get to do, I did almost every single thing I wanted to do. The one thing that I didn't do was go down to the grocery store, to the flower department at the grocery store, and get some sunflowers just in recognition of
Oh.
amazing progress that Ukraine is making. And
It's pretty bananas, right?
it's pretty bananas, and it's I think everybody watches that. Everybody that is rooting for Ukraine watches that and goes, as an American, we know how that feels.
Oh, huge. Huge.
And that's why we can root for them and relate to them, because that's how we roll, I think, or that's how we have rolled. And to see another outnumbered, outgunned,
But not really.
but not really. Of course, they've had a lot of help. When we were having our Revolutionary War, we had help. Hello, France, if you're listening.
You get by with a little help from your friends.
And that's what it's all about. So that's exciting. Joe and I were talking a couple of days ago about the fact that the show today is going to land on 9/11, and he said that, you know, it might be interesting to just sort of talk about maybe where were you? What do you remember? Where were you on 9/11? And we can talk about that a little bit, but also I think that serves as a reminder to us about challenges we've faced and faced down again, coupled, you know, in recognition of the gains that Ukraine has been making. It's like this necessary thing, and overall, it's supposed to lead us into a more positive direction and a more unified direction, and that's my hope anyway, that all of these things sort of lead up to that. What were you doing on 9/11?
9/11, like, how did I get the news? I was just getting going I lived in Colorado at the time, so I was Mountain Standard Time, and I was just home with my son. It was just my son and I. He would have been like 2.5 at the time, so I was watching him, and my mother-in-law called me up and said, actually, I had been online with the dial-up modem.
Dial-up?
With the dial-up.
Beep boop, beep boop.
2001. And I guess she'd been trying to get through. I had been online, and she knocked me offline, and that used to be really obnoxious. Come on, man, I'm trying to get my finances done or whatever. But she got through. I answered the phone. She says, you might want to turn on the television, like some really weird stuff is going down. And I turned on the TV right before tower number 2 was hit. And I mean, my wife at the time was pregnant with our daughter, and she was 2 months out from giving birth. And I just remember that evening. Like, you remember how chaotic it felt the first couple days? Like, we did not know what was happening. And I was just thinking, like, I'm about to bring another child into this world, and I don't even know if we're going to have a country in 2 months. Oh, look at that. That's heavy.
This was, we had received this, our factory was out in Thousand Oaks at the time that went down. And we had a subscription to Time magazine, and this is the Time magazine issue right after that came to our factory in Newbury Park. And we were just moving out of Newbury Park into a new place. But, and in the process of moving, we had a sales representative out in Connecticut. He and his wife had flown out to help with the transition to the new location.
Wow, that's
so
cool.
We were living in Calabasas, in this sort of idyllic little valley.
You lived in Calabasas?
Yeah. It's kind of a transition place to live. We were thinking if we were going to move the factory back to the valley, we were a bit way out in Thousand Oaks area, and it was just, we got tired of living there because it was too isolated. But we were in a very nice sort of idyllic little valley that a lot of fresh air, and it was just beautiful. Waking up a balcony, waking up in the morning and seeing the view in the valley and the fresh air and all that. It was
Calabasas.
Really nice. So our friends were in town, and we had had a nice dinner the night before, and drank some wine and stuff. And I woke up early because I was all charged up, and it was a beautiful morning. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a really good day. We got a lot of stuff to do. It's going to be really productive. I'm really looking forward to this. And I'm going to make coffee for everybody. And I'm starting to fire up the kitchen, and I decided to turn the TV on as background. And I turned the TV on.
You're thinking it's Price is Right time or
And
something.
they're showing the first tower and they don't know really what's happened yet because it's early in the morning.
Yeah.
They're speculating that what kind of plane? How did it happen that a plane hit this tower? Was it a navigation error? Was it this? Was it that? Was it a hijacking? You know, and while all this speculation is going on, I'm like, the sales guy is starting to stir. He hears me in the kitchen. He goes, "What's up?" And I said, "I think we should wake everybody up, and I think we should be watching this." And he looks at the TV and he goes, "Holy!" And then the wives came out and we're watching it. And then once all four of us were watching the TV, nobody spoke. Mm-hmm. As we all sort of gathered in front of the television, mm-hmm. the second tower was hit. And that's at the time when everybody kind of went, the whole paradigm just changed.
Yeah, yeah.
And instantly in that moment, it was like...
It goes from like horrible curiosity to like complete fear, like, holy shit, this is coordinated.
Yeah, it went from like 0 to 10 to infinity in the space of 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And everything changed. The way we're thinking about the day, what we're going to do, what about those people? How is that? And then, of course, there's still the speculation about the Pentagon, about the flight heading back to Washington that's over Pennsylvania, and all of these. It just like went off the rails from there. And I just remember nobody really knew what to say or think. Do we work? Do we stop? Do we help? How do we help? There's nothing we can do. Just a wave of brain is like struggling to come up with options and thoughts and processing, and you can't. I just remember going, I can't. It's impossible. And that was insanity. So that's how I felt that day. So it's fitting that we're having a memorial about it, and it's fitting that the people of Ukraine are seeing some light at the end of their tunnel, and that hopefully they will have a 20th anniversary celebration to commemorate, hopefully, the continuation of what's going on now. That's how I feel about everything. They're all jumbled together to me today. And on top of that, I'm stoked to be doing the show. I'm glad to have you back after your trip.
Me? My dumbass?
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
And
I'm happy to be back.
And I'm going to have fun showing you the wild and crazy stuff that I actually envisioned something to do today for the show that, like I often do, I raise the bar way too high, knowing that I'm going to get about 60% of the way there, and by the time that we were 5 minutes away from launch, I actually did everything I think I even told you I wasn't going to be able to do all of these things, and then I ended up doing them anyway. So,
well, I didn't know what you were going to do. I knew it would be something that surprised me, because I'm always surprised.
Well, we talked about what, some of the stuff was possibly switching tubes and doing this, and then I said, I'm not going to get into that, but it turns out that I'm actually prepared to do that if we want to go that far.
Oh, that's right. I see.
So there's that.
Look at that. Look at that.
There's that, and we'll get to what that is momentarily. And I had another little thought.
Uh-oh.
Does
it require me to do something?
No,
Tap dancing?
It just requires you to shake
dancing?
your head in
Okay.
disgust.
Oh.
Yeah.
Or how do you like this one?
Exactly. That's perfect. That's
Okay.
that's it.
All right, I'm ready.
That's the setup.
I'm ready.
Just happened to be surfing YouTube videos, and I saw yet again some visible, actually somebody I consider pretty knowledgeable, tech, doing a cab job on an amp from 1995. That is an absolutely unnecessary cap job.
Okay.
And it irritated me to the point where
Did you get in the comments, man?
I did not get in the comments. I just went, nah. It's going to be, it's going to be, everybody knows who I am, and that when I do those things and how I feel about it, and they're hell-bent on taking me to task anyway, but the only difference is of all the people that take issue with my attitude about replacing filter capacitors and amplifiers, I have not heard one of them, not one, say, I have the spec sheet for the capacitors right here, and here's the data that I use to extrapolate the need to do that, and here's the test equipment I use, and here are the test results that I accumulated from using said test equipment to support my position.
It's always anecdotal,
It's
like
always,
dogma.
It's dogma. It's canon.
Yeah.
It's you do well. Everybody knows.
You dumbass.
A lot of people are saying it. It's
Everyone knows.
I like a lot of people are saying, because it's just as mindless as that mentality. So I the guy actually zoomed in so that I could actually read the date codes on the caps.
Oh,
and
excellent.
I could read the brand of the capacitors.
Hot damn.
So I know what actual capacitors they are, who manufactured them, when they were made, and what the specs are, because I could get the part numbers off of them and download
Steve's bringing the receipts, yo.
the data sheet for said capacitors. And also he zoomed in on the new capacitors he replaced them with.
Oh, that's even more.
Again, model numbers and specs, so I could go search that manufacturer's website and pull down their documentation for the capacitors and the specs that they used. And then I could do some simple calculations that anybody could do. And it's funny because I've considered writing a book about a lot of things, and I just don't think I have the tenacity to write a book. But
When do I do this?
well, that's okay. Just to give you an example, the capacitors that were replaced, the specifications say lifetime, 5,000 hours. Okay.
Yeah. See, did you see Scott's comment? I'm going to throw it up so maybe you can see it.
Fender amp, I have a couple on my bench.
Wait,
shorted
not
week
that
and what Fender amp and when?
This one.
What?
This is directly responding to what you were saying.
Let's see, I don't see what people are upset about you thinking that, but as a tech, most of the caps are rated 3,000 to 5,000 hours, and changing them doesn't hurt the amp. It doesn't. But if they don't need changing, the amp is not hurt. So why are you unhurting the amp that is not hurt in the first place?
And that's your whole kind of thesis.
Yeah,
statement
okay,
there, right?
so first of all, the capacitors that were in that amp, the subject amp that we're talking about, are rated at 5,000, and you and you, Scott, mentioned 3,000 to 5,000 hours, and depending on which capacitor you choose, they have a different lifetime. But let's talk about that. Let's just use the 5,000 hour number, and
Okay.
let's just talk about that.
All right.
5,000 hours is a number. And before I get into what's behind that number, let's just take that number in isolation.
Okay.
5,000 hours. And let's just say you use your amplifier 2 hours a day, religiously, every day, 365 days a year. Not one of you does that. Nobody that I know does that. But let's just say you play your amp 2 hours a day, 365 days a year religiously.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All right. That is 6.85 years of capacitor usage at 5,000 hours. So if you only played your amp 1 hour a day, that's
multiply that by 2.
yeah, that's 13 and a half years.
Mm-hmm.
If you only use your amp an hour a day for a total number of days of the year that adds up to half the year, now we're at 26 years.
We need the Apple Watch app thing for your amplifier to actually see how much you're using it, I think.
Right. Okay. Now, that's just taking the 5,000 hours out of context. Now let's put that 5,000 hours in context, into its proper context.
Okay.
The manufacturer is saying their lifetime expectation of the amplifier, of the product, the capacitor, is not how long will the capacitor last. If you look at what they're really calling lifetime, what they're telling you is the amount of time that the capacitor will maintain its original factory specifications within plus or minus 20%
Okay.
of that time.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, at maximum voltage, at maximum ripple current. Okay, so let's talk about the voltage for just a second. This 5,000 hour capacitor is rated 5,000 hours at 500 volts at maximum ripple current, which on this capacitor is 0.2 amps, 200 milliamps, all right? So that means, and at its rated temperature, which is 85 degrees C. 85 degrees C is 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, Fahrenheit. Normally, anybody playing a gig with an amplifier for 4 hours, the hottest that the amp is getting inside, which would be the ambient temperature inside the chassis of the amplifier, not the ambient temperature of the room, call it between 70 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They're saying we ran the capacitor for 5,000 hours at 180 degrees Fahrenheit at 200 milliamps at 500 volts. This capacitor is being run so hot you can't touch it for 5,000 hours, or they have a computerized test jig that extrapolates based on the performance that they tested under these conditions for 1 hour or 1 day, would extrapolate out to 5,000 hours
Right.
estimated
Right.
under these same conditions. And they're saying under those conditions that the capacitor won't be dead at the end of that. They're just saying it might fall off of its specifications by 10% or 20% maximum, which the capacitance tolerance rating is plus or minus 20% anyway. So even when you buy it off the shelf, a 30 mic capacitor could be 36 or 24 microfarads already. So they're saying that when you run the capacitor at its maximum for 5,000 hours, at the end of that 5,000 hours, it might drift past its plus or minus 20% tolerance, but they don't say how much. They just said it'll go out of these parameters. They don't say it'll break. They don't say it needs to be replaced. They don't say it's done for and throw it away. They just say it'll slip out of its tolerance a little bit, or it may not. So, in a guitar amplifier, the preamp decoupling capacitors, they generally operate at 1 milliamp. That's 0.001 amp.
Mm-hmm.
So the manufacturer's ripple spec is 0.2 amps. That's 200 times its average current rating that it's operating at inside the amp. It's 40% of the 60% of the voltage that the capacitor is rated at. It's less than 50% of the temperature that the capacitor is rated at. So based on all that, if you take all those numbers and extrapolate them all out to real world operation, that capacitor is easily good for between 25 and 35 years. And if you include, then if you divide that by the number of actual hours that you use the amp a year, it can double.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes 50 years, or it can double again, which becomes 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that a capacitor is going to last 100 years. Who knows? But what is going to happen is that you're going to be able to measure what changed and determine if it needs to be replaced or not. You don't just arbitrarily do it because Canon says you should, everybody else does it, or the specs that I didn't read and don't understand say 5,000 hours, it's got to go. That is all crap. So,
Okay, you ready?
that's exactly what I'm saying, Brendan. I'm saying replace the capacitors every time, all the time, whenever possible, at all cost. Yes.
Hey, Jim, respect, man. That's rough. That's heavy. You see that?
So I just had to rant about that because I wanted to explain that the same guy replaced a couple of film caps because I've had experience with them getting leaky and so they will leak DC voltage across the capacitor, and if they're the coupling caps for the phase inverter, that means that the leakage voltage in the capacitors will cause the bias voltage to drift. Technically, that's correct, but you can measure that. And if you're measuring the DC voltage at the input and the output of the cap, and you're not measuring leakage, then you don't have an excuse to replace the caps.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're really highly reliable capacitors. Now, I can get into sort of a conundrum by saying that because on the one hand, I'm saying these capacitors are perfectly fine. There is no sane reason to replace them. If you've got are a technician, really a technician, you understand volts and amps and watts and capacitance and all that, and you have the equipment that you can measure that with and check it, if all of those conditions exist in your shop, you have the tools you need to make an absolute determination. Oh, I measured this and it's out of spec. Oh, I measured this and it's leaky. If it isn't, then the whole idea of, well, it's preventive maintenance. What are you preventing? You preventing the customer from finding out that they never need that particular capacitor replaced? I don't know what you're preventing. And the conundrum is, new capacitors are getting better and better all the time. They're getting smaller, the electrolytes are getting more stable, the insulators are becoming more better insulators, and the in large scale production, the accuracy in production is staying tighter and tighter to tolerances than ever before, and great. Still, that's not a reason to change them. The reason to change them is that they go bad. So, okay, enough of that. Off soapbox.
I love this rant.
it just drives me mad.
So, okay, but let's really encapsulate what you were saying one last time here,
Right.
which is not that you are against replacing capacitors ever. That's not the argument.
No.
The argument is rather than just saying it's old, replace it because it's old, you're saying actually learn about what you're working on, the specs, your test equipment, and actually bother to test these things before you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
If you're a mechanic, somebody drives in, and one of the tires is lower air pressure than all the other three, do you throw away the tire and put a new one on? Or do you take your tire pressure gauge and put it on there and go, oh, it's only 28,
Yeah,
it's supposed
yeah.
to be 35.
Or
Well,
like,
I just filled it up. I have my own pressure gauge, and I checked it, and I filled it up to 35 a week ago, and now it's back to 28 again. Oh, okay. Let's jack it up a little bit and then spin the tire. And, oh, look, there's a nail there. We can fix that.
yeah, or the car is old, therefore you need to replace the brake pads. Well, maybe the car hasn't really been driven for squat. Maybe it's super low mileage, and the brake pads are virtually brand new.
Or the oil change, or some other critical part, like let's just replace the starter because they generally go after 50,000 miles. So let's just replace the starter. You're gonna need to someday. But oh wait, I was gonna keep this car for 5 years, but then I got a raise at work, and so I sell the car in 2 years instead of 5 years. So I went and paid for the replacement of a starter that I didn't really need, and now I'm going to make that much less on the sale of the car because I did that. And saying that I did that isn't going to increase the value of the car. It's just going to tell the new customer, the new owner, that you did that. What's the benefit there? Yeah, I'm expanding on your encapsulation, which is kind of counterproductive. So I'm going to shut up. And
I don't think you're going to shut up. I
well,
feel another
because-
thought formulating.
Because I'm just, if somebody wants to make the case that there's arguments for both sides, my response is going to be, if I'm going to have a debate with somebody that has done the comprehensive testing and study of the issue that I have done, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. If you haven't done that, then you're not even, I'm not listening. I'm not listening to that, because
I think-
what am I debating against? I'm debating facts against somebody's supposition. And unless that person has done the research and the homework, I'm sorry, I'm not going to debate supposition. I'll only debate somebody else's different interpretation of the facts. And if somebody doesn't, well, okay, I take everything that you said at face value. I've done exactly the same calculations, and here's my interpretation of that. I might go, oh yeah, but somebody that hasn't, sorry. If you go to a debate,
This is actually, when you pull the camera back, this is about something much larger than caps.
what is it about?
It's kind of it's dwelling right next to your malcontent nature, actually, and it has a lot to do with you want to engage with people who actually engage the material at hand. You want to have conversations with people who actually are doing more than regurgitating something that you've heard a million times that's not really backed up by any sort of real evidence.
Right.
And it's you having dealt with this sort of thing for 40 years, it gets under your skin when you see that kind of thing passed around. That's what I think is going on. Scott, yeah, what it comes down to is just a big
so
pet peeve.
experience is useless and only book learning. No. I never said experience is useless. I'm saying experience is not a replacement for facts, because you could have fixed 100 amplifiers. If you've never done the homework. Your only experience is that you've done it the way that you've done it because that's the way you did it. And that doesn't increase your knowledge base. It only improves how quickly you can swap out caps and how neatly you solder them, and maybe which manufacturer you prefer to buy capacitors from. That level of experience does accumulate. It doesn't change documented facts. So when I'm saying to somebody, 5,000 hours doesn't mean what you think it does, and they come back to me and go, well, you know, but if the cap fails, you blow the power transformer, the customer's going to be mad at you. That's not the discussion. The discussion is 5,000 hours doesn't mean what you think it does. And if you prove to me that it doesn't mean what I think it means, great, bring it on. I'm all here for it. I'm totally here for it. If without that, time to move on.
Time to move on. I think we should talk about Dave's amp.
Absolutely, Paul. Just don't carry a transformer by the leads unless it's already a broken transformer and you want to swing it around your head a few times before you sling it at somebody's forehead. And then, by all means, carry the transformer by its lead wires. Okay,
now that that's out of the way.
Yeah.
Let's rewind. Let's rewind back to the middle of July 2022. We had Dave Friedman in the house, and I actually pulled the clip when we were talking about this. I forget what inspired it, but I asked Dave what his favorite amp was.
You pulled the clip?
I pulled the clip.
You're my hero.
Well, don't go that far. So let's look at what Dave says about this amplifier before we get into it. This is back July 17th, 2022.
So,
Dave, what's your favorite amp of all time?
really?
Yeah. Like,
Pimo says some bartenders can read lips and nods.
I have a
That's why most of them are in the witness.
I have a 68 50 watt Plexi Marshall that I love. That it's a long story, but he made it sound the way it does.
what? Okay, you got to tell this.
Uh-oh.
So
Wait a minute. Is this got anything to do with Joey's Marshall?
no.
Okay, so
Okay.
when did you get your hit pause on this amplifier?
So year, boy, that would have been early. Must have been 89 or something.
Okay, so near when you guys kind of
4.
89, you were like a skinny, hot-looking, long-haired baby.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
So where'd you
Yes,
find this
exactly.
amplifier?
That's
Where'd you
the
find this
response.
thing?
My friend who runs a guitar store in Michigan,
Right.
that runs Motor City Guitar.
So you were out here.
I was out here. He called me and goes, "Hey, I got this Marshall. I think you might want it," because he knew I liked Marshalls.
Yeah.
He might want it. It's a Plexi. I'm like, okay, how much? $300. So it had a replaced power transformer. Not a big deal.
Oh, okay.
Actually, maybe even better because it's a little higher voltage. Actually. And I had this 20 watt Marshall that Reinhold Bogner had modified. This was before amps for me,
Okay.
really. This is just infancy of me.
You didn't have your head
Tinkering
in
a
them
little.
yet. Okay, yeah.
And this 20 watt Marshall sounded amazing. It was really cool sounding. Can you do that to this 50? Yes, I know it was a Plexi. This was a long time ago, people.
So you bought the Plexi and you're asking Reinhold,
Yeah,
can you do this thing?
So he did supposedly the same. It sounded absolutely nothing like the 20 watt Marshall. Now I understand why. 20 watts a whole different thing. The EL84s, everything. The no negative feedback and all sorts of stuff. So I get it.
Can't do it, right?
Well, maybe you can, but he didn't.
Not in the same way.
Right.
So it was like, this doesn't sound good. I don't like it. Yeah. So then I gave it to you, and you put it back to stock.
That's funny. That's the Steve Fryette story.
You put it back to stock.
It's like, oh, you need some work done, huh?
And
you want
let's
to
just
sound
make
good?
it
Let's
do
just, like,
what it
undo
did
all the
when it was.
damage.
Hey, put it back to stock, and voila, that was it.
Hey!
And I used to use.
Put that to stock, fresh tubes, bias it the right way, and clean it up a little bit here.
Right.
Malcontents. Hey, Simon. And glad to see you again. Hey, Amanda. Great to see you again. And I was the one that gave everybody COVID, not Dave. So, sorry about that. One more time.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
That was
Hey,
not my fault this time.
It's my fault. Hey,
Damn.
I just wanted to say, hey, Simon. Hey, Amanda. And I wanted to say, I was the one that gave everybody COVID, not Dave.
Okay, hold on. Are we still muted?
Nope, shouldn't be.
Okay, we're not muted over here. Please, friends, let us know if we're still muted.
No, we were temporarily muted. You're seeing a delay. We're back good. I've unmuted.
Okay, we're good. All right, thanks, guys.
But don't take my word for it.
So, Amanda, you said flashbacks. This is my favorite flashback from that same night. As showed up in the chat, the whole COVID thing. So we talked about how as soon, like we drank a lot on that show.
Yeah.
And we were on for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned on the show afterwards that I remember when I was leaning forward to end the broadcast, I hit the button and then I just rolled over onto the floor and I didn't get up for like an hour. And I thought, oh, I wish somebody took a picture of that. Well, it just so happens.
And as you were hitting the floor, Dave goes, I think Joe lost.
Yeah, I think Joe lost. And here's evidence that I actually did indeed lose. I love that we have that.
I do too.
So anyhow, after that show, you and I were kind of talking about that amplifier, and we had been talking about addressing the topic of biasing amps. And we thought, hey, maybe it might be like, I wonder if Dave still has that amp. And I guess you just hit Dave up to say, hey,
Yeah.
can we take a look at it?
Give it to me.
Yeah. So we do indeed have the amplifier here. We have indeed opened it up. And
by the way, it's got one of the filter caps in it is a dual 50 wired in parallel, like they are in that amp, that was replaced in 1975. And it, in fact, has a bad section in it that it actually has way more capacitance than stock. And Dave mentioned that he might replace the filter cap somewhere along the line, but he didn't really know if he needed to. So at the time that you'll see, we made a little a video of working on the amp and testing it, and you'll see that I found specifically a capacitor that was a candidate for being replaced.
Okay.
Only I'm not replacing it because it's Dave's amp, and he can damn well replace it if he wants to.
Right. So let's just take a look at the amp here. Got a little clip, and I'll leave our mic up so you can talk over it if you want. But
All right.
this is what it looks like. So, front panel, it's pretty clean. Pretty sexy.
The capacitor with the torn up insulation on the top of it is the one that is reading questionably.
And those are the new JJs.
That's right.
So that's the non-gut shots of that
Right.
amplifier.
Right.
So Before we, well, actually, I have the next clip that I have is you talking about the test equipment that you use to do this stuff. Do you want to kind of give a preamble about this amp, or just overall thoughts before I show that?
Well, it's a little rattier inside than I recall, and I did research its actual age, and it is 68.
Oh, hold on. Kelly, it has the touring circuit.
Yeah, it does. It does. It has the
Seriously, it's in the video.
Part of the mod. When it came to me, it wasn't stock. It had an additional gain stage in it and some other things done to it. As a 68, it would have been set up very similar to a JTM 45 on the input stage, or a super bass, for example, where both the bright and normal inputs have the same basic voicing, and no bypass cap on the bright volume. What makes the bright and normal sound different on this amp is that it had been modified to the super lead specs, but again, without a bright cap across the bright channel, the channel 1, the volume 1 pot. So it doesn't have that extra brightness on top that a super lead would have. So it's kind of halfway between a super lead and a JTM style amp, or a Plexi, an early Plexi 50.
And you're talking about it, all of this stuff, as you're going through it in the video that we made. I don't know if you remember that. So that'll be
I
in
don't
there.
remember
Okay,
half
all
of
right.
what I said because I
All
was
right.
in ramble mode. But
Yeah.
what I was saying was is basically that it has some of the stuff. I didn't return it 100% stock after looking at it. Either that, or somebody put the touring circuit in after I looked at it 30 years ago,
Yeah.
which is entirely possible. And what we're talking about when we say the touring circuit is this little tone control network modification that bumps up the mid-range response a little bit, which is something that Hendrix is known to request on his amps at the time. So that's what that is.
Okay, all right. So just because when we've kind of done these things in the past, people have chimed in with questions about what your rig is there at the shop. Let's take a look at this, where you're kind of detailing what you use. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so before we hop into the procedural element of this presentation, can you walk us through the relevant gear that we're going to use for
All right.
biasing?
Well, let's just work from left to right then.
Okay.
I've got a LCR meter, which is a sophisticated test meter for testing inductance, capacitance, and resistance. We're going to use it to check the capacitors today.
Okay.
And then we've got a voltmeter set to AC volts that is connected to our static test load that we'll use to read the voltage at the output when we're doing an output power test.
Okay.
And then we have a scope, of course, and a digital voltmeter that we're going to use for checking the various voltages that we're going to compare and discuss during the course of the examination.
Okay.
We have a soldering station should we need it. We've got an AC line voltage monitor that's telling us what the AC voltage going to all the other test equipment is, so we can sort of monitor and make sure that we're staying locked down tight.
Okay.
And we're going to want to see that at 120 volts. We're generally going to keep it at 120 volts. And this variac here is the way we compensate. If the voltage drifts up, we'll turn it down. If the voltage comes down, we'll turn it up.
Yes, people, that is a variac.
But that's not the main one that we're going to be using for the amp. The
Okay.
amp is going to be connected to another device. We'll get to that in a second. We've got our signal generator, our function generator that we're going to be using to send a sine wave and a square wave to the amp under test. And then we have the lab volt machine, which is actually, it's a 50s, 60s era student lab test equipment that's used to do lab measurements in an introductory electronics course back in the day.
It's in such good shape. It looks like somebody did a reissue of an old piece of gear.
Actually, this was a gift from Josh Fiden at Voodoo Labs.
Oh wow!
He had gone to some night classes at the local college a number of years ago, and while he was there, one of the administrators said, "We have a whole bunch of electronic test stuff that we're going to unload. If there's anything you want, grab it." And he grabbed this, and then it sat in his shop for about 10 or 20 years untouched. And so when he decided to clean up his shop, he called me up and asked me if I wanted it to stick in my shop for
10 to 20 years,
something like that. And I said, "Yeah, sure, send it." So it was, since he was just giving it to me, I said, "I'll find a way to use it." And the way I have it set up is also as a variac with a meter monitoring the voltage. And there's a lot of other things that I can test with it, and you decide what output you want to use for whatever voltage function you're using, and then you can patch that particular voltage up to whatever relevant meter that you want to monitor. Current, amps, we've got this is an ammeter. This is a DC ammeter, an AC ammeter, an AC voltmeter, and a DC voltmeter. And each of the voltage meters has a range switch so that you can set the input of each meter to the voltages or currents that you want, and those will be monitoring whatever outputs that you patch down here. So right now I've got the variable AC voltage coming out of here, patching into there, and that also connects to, it says 0 to 135 volts, 5 amps.
Yes.
This says 0 to 120 volts, 5 amps, but it's actually connected to this. So whatever is going up on this meter is coming out here, and that's what we're going to connect the amp to monitor its own AC voltage while we're monitoring other voltages inside.
Okay.
That about covers it.
All right, that's all the gear. Unmuted?
Yep.
Unmuted.
Yep.
We should have sound. What do you have to say about that? Anything? You guys have any questions about the gear stuff? I think we should have some waiting theme music. Do do do. Like the yeah. Yes, thank you. We got sound. Thanks, guys.
So we have a bunch of more footage on that, and I don't know how much time we want to spend on it or play that. I think we should. I think it'd be better off editing that and putting it up on YouTube as sort of like a.
Oh yeah,
tutorial or
I'm
something
currently turning it in.
Yeah.
You know, like we did with the concert and some of the other things where it'll be a standalone product.
Hey, Markel, if you really want a variac like that, you could very well be the next person that this thing goes to, because I don't know that I'm getting all the use out of it that I thought that I would get out of it, and I've really sort of updated all of my test gear, so it's fun to have up there and fun to look at, but its usefulness to me is diminishing. So. Just keep lobbying. That may end up on your bench at some point.
You know why it looks like a reissue to me is the colors are sort of like. You remember when the Joe Meek stuff was reissued, all the green studio stuff? It kind of has that.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, we're bringing. It's supposed to look like '60s stuff, and it's in such great shape that it looks like a reissue of something like that. Here, answer this real fast before we talk further about the amp. I don't know what that means.
Well, Regal is a brand.
Oh,
and,
okay.
All I have to say is they're reasonably priced, and they certainly do the job that I need them to do. Digital scopes are, unless you're going to spend a lot of money, the resolution can be kind of slow. But for our application, it doesn't need to be. I'm not doing a lot of work in the megahertz region, so the resolution on display, there's a little bit of a delay on it that can be a bit annoying. It's only annoying if you're trying to do 50 things at once really quickly.
Okay.
And there are days when we're just, just carving through production like crazy. The minute that we get a big shipment of tubes, after a month of not receiving a shipment of tubes, and we have a backlog of orders, and we have a bunch of stuff that all has to ship, and everybody wants everything all at once, and it's all hands on deck, then it's onto the load, off the load, onto the scope. There's just the amount of the number of units that goes through QC to get to the shipping department, just it increases exponentially, and the time that it takes to do it decreases exponentially. So that's when you notice little things like delays on a meter setting changing. Like if you're switching from DC to AC mode, it's like a fraction of a second, which is no big deal. In an environment like that, it gives you a chance to drum your fingers 4 times before it, it's just like that. That's a little irritating.
You're seeing it repeatedly during the day. You're like, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it works great. They're not these long, really heavy, boat anchors that take up a ton of workbench space. They're 3 or 4, inches deep, and they're easy to stack on the bench, and they're very reliable, and they've got a good reputation. And I just bought it on a recommendation from somebody else that uses a bunch of their stuff, and I liked it, so I bought their digital voltmeter. I love that. Although I will say that when I switch from current mode to voltage mode, and the delay is long enough for me to sling an expletive at it while it's changing.
So Jim wants to know, is Godzilla the office supervisor? And does Godzilla have
Godzilla's just the
reason for
mascot.
being?
Well,
do you yell at Godzilla when you're angry at your
we're
scopes?
Godzilla fans. That's pretty much it. And one of our fam is a Godzilla freak too. So he occasionally sends us Godzilla memorabilia, and that was one of the things he sent. That arrived about the same time that the GPDI was officially launching.
Oh, that's right.
And we used him in the release video, which is hilarious. And we set up a scenario where Godzilla's walking through a city, but he's actually walking through piles of tubes and crushing them as he's walking. And so we had a lot of fun with him. So he just sits up there.
Right on, Scott. That's my favorite.
Just sort of.
It's actually my favorite.
He's the mascot. He's like the good luck charm for us back in the QC department.
So back to Dave's amp, because we were talking about biasing the thing, right? So Dave came in here and graciously said that you were responsible for making it sound, getting it in the zone of sounding the way he wanted it to sound, and you kind of quipped that all you did was bring it back to stock and properly bias it. So I think what gets a little bit interesting here is Dave, when you picked up the amp, you guys had a conversation about the amplifier, and he told you where it was biased now, how he does it, and then you were kind of talking about what you probably did back then, and when he's playing it now, he biases a particular way, and he runs it with a variac. what, how were you doing it differently back then versus how he has it set up now? Does that sound different? Is there like some sort of overarching, philosophy behind how you're doing that?
Well,
Like, explain it to those of us who don't know jack shit.
of course, I've accumulated a lot more knowledge of a knowledge base between then and now, so that I'm just more cognizant of all the various parameters at play
Okay.
when you set bias, and also the circumstances under which you'll set the bias a certain way. It isn't always a specific number, a specific percentage, like 70% dissipation, which is just kind of like a ballpark standard that a lot of people use, and it's a fitting standard in a very typical environment like a guitar amp, where the tubes are standing straight up and down, where the chassis is relatively big, and the housing around it is big, so there's generally a lot of ventilation around it. So in a circumstance like that, 70 is fine with normal plate voltage. And of course, if the plate voltage is a little higher than normal, then you will bias it a little colder to get it to 70, and that in itself is not a big deal either. But the thing about the placeholder that you made for this show, that I asked you to put Einstein's face on there and have him saying it's all relative, is because the relativity of the voltage and the bias and the type of tubes they are, and the environment that they're in, bears a lot. It has a critical bearing on why you set the bias a certain way and where you would set it. For example, I'll generally set the bias on the power stations a little lower because they're in a very compact little box.
Okay.
And it's all metal. The tubes are generally close together, and they're sitting horizontally rather than vertically. So the dissipation factor is a lot different.
Sure.
It takes longer for the tubes to dissipate that accumulated heat. So they're just physically going to run hotter. So why you would set the bias more like 35% rather than 30 or even 25 is because they're in a more enclosed environment. And you're basically, the way you're using a product like the power station, you're not using it to play loud, you're using it for the opposite reason, to play less loud. So the tubes are really idling a lot. They're not being pushed very hard. And in an amp that you don't push very hard, if you cold bias it, like in a normal head, it's just going to sort of stay cold biased most of the time, unless you thrash it and run it into attenuator. And if you're doing that, then the tube's plates will start dissipating more heat.
Sure.
And when the tube plate dissipates heat, it will transfer some of that heat to the cathode. Now, this is really important, because if you cold bias a tube, you're running it below its normal trend conductance, and you're causing, in the process, you're causing crossover distortion to occur.
Would you like to discuss crossover distortion?
Which we can discuss, but we've discussed it before, and we can come back to it in a minute if you want to show the little picture of the graph.
Yes.
We'll do that in just a second.
Okay.
But the salient point is that if you cold bias an amp and you're thrashing it, the plates in the tube will heat the cathode, and they will effectively raise the emission of the cathode. What is the cathode? The cathode is the thing that generates the thermionic emission. It releases the electrons that had to the plate. They're attracted to the plate because of the high voltage on the plate, and they bombard the plate. How much emission comes off the cathode is determined by how hot they are. The filament's job is to heat up the cathode so that thermionic emission occurs. If you cold bias the amplifier, the emission will be stunted a little bit. But if you thrash the amp so that the plates get really hot, it will add its own heat to the cathode that's already being heated by the filament voltage, and it will counteract the cold bias. And actually, you can actually hear it. If you are slamming on an amplifier, you record it just playing a couple of chords or playing a power chord or something like that, and then you play the amp until it's really, really hot and record another track of that. The track where it's really, really hot is going to sound fuller and fatter than the original track, because now the tubes have run much hotter. So, but then when you stop playing and the tube heat dissipation decreases because it's idling, it will go back to its cold bias state.
Okay.
Now, all of that is just fine except for one thing. And that one thing is that in the process of a tube being cold biased, but in an environment where it's being forced to run really, really hot and then really cool off, the expansion and contraction factor inside the tube increases quite a lot. And what that does is it causes the Formica spacer to loosen up a little bit. It causes the grid, those delicate grid wires, to expand and contract, which causes them to eventually, it's very delicate wire, it's brittle wire, tungsten wire is brittle, and it will break and cause an internal short of the tube. So you don't really want to cold bias the tubes too much. You want to run them in a range where it's normal for them to be operating that way. And in the power station, especially the PS100 with 6550s, the temperature stays pretty consistently warm in there. Because the tubes are close together, because it's an enclosed space, because the fan that's in the power station is really there to keep the reactive load part of the power station, the load resistors, cool more than the tubes necessarily, because the tubes are designed to run at 250 degrees at their hottest point. So it isn't really difficult to imagine that you just run the tubes hot, and if you put your hand on top of the chassis, it's like, oh, it's hot. Yeah, don't put your hands on it. You know that product is designed to run hot. That's what it's designed to do. So the fan isn't really performing a great amount of heat transfer out of the tubes. It's more depends on how hard you're using the load. If you're not really pounding on the load a lot on a power station, then the percentage of air flow caused by the fan will have a greater effect on the tubes than the load resistors. But if the load resistors are really, really hot, the actual heat transfer, the heat exchange, goes in the opposite direction. If the load is hotter than the tubes, then the heat transfer from the load goes in the direction of the tube and heats them up. If the load is cooler than the tubes, then the heat transfer from the tubes goes in the direction of the reactive load. It's heat exchange is a physical phenomena. It's just like water runs downhill. Heat transfers to a cooler.
That's what a heat sink does.
That's what a heat sink does. Right. So if heat from the tubes will block heat exchange from load resistors that aren't as hot as the tubes until the load gets hotter than the tubes, and then the heat exchange goes the other way.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it really depends on the environment, and that's where we tend to run the bias a little cooler in the power stations, because the tubes are generally in a hotter environment, and the emission will stay up a little higher because of the heat generated inside. In an amplifier, again, where there's a lot of space in there, or in a hi-fi with the tubes on the top, you want to bias it a little hotter just so that they maintain more of an equilibrium.
Yeah.
Interesting fact, when we first released the 2150 power amp, the filament voltage was a little on the low side. It wasn't exactly 6.3 volts. It was about 5.9, which is well within tolerance, but it was a little on the low side. And I didn't really think that much of it because it was in a big enclosure. It was enclosed, but it had a big, powerful fan, which people complained about because it was noisy. But the idea was that it needs to evacuate a lot of heat,
Right.
because it's putting out a lot of power.
Uh-huh.
Vernon Reed contacted me after he got his first red 2150, and he goes, a really interesting thing is going on in the studio. After I've been really thrashing on it a while, we can see it on the VU meters. It goes up about not quite 3 dB, but we can see it getting, the volume increases by itself when it gets hotter, and then we can see it cool down when I play quieter. Is that normal? And I go, yeah, that's actually normal.
I've never heard of this before.
But he called it out, and I thought, under this very specific circumstance, somebody with a real ear might detect that. But the likelihood that anybody would is so slim. And who was the guy that flagged me on it? Vernon Reed. So that should tell you something about how sensitive that cat's ears are.
We need to have Vernon on the show.
Yeah,
man.
we've been trying to reach him. We're buddies and all that, and he's sort of been busy with a lot of different projects. But yeah, I'd love to have him. I'd love to have him on this discussion. But that was something that I went, oh yeah, all right, I'll pay more attention to that. As a result of that, we went back and we redesigned the power transformer a little bit to bring
No kidding.
the filament voltage up to the actual correct ratio for 120 volts line, because the line voltage can vary between 150 and 125.
Yeah.
So we made
yeah.
we made the middle line on the primary a little different, so that it would actually be 6.3 volts at the average middle point of typical line voltage, and made that adjustment. Now, going back to why that's all important to the bias is, when you're biasing an amp, since all those factors are relative, the thing that you want to do is find the most reliable, stable voltage in there that you can call reference, and then set the AC input of the amp to that.
But it's a problem when you're trying to bias an amplifier and people are trying to print things on a printer that is running.
Well, we're having some electrical work done at the factory to increase the number of separate circuits that everything runs on, because we got who thinks that computers draw a lot of juice? But they do. And we added another printer to one of the circuits that all of our test equipment is operating off of. And when somebody's running a bunch of sheets of documentation for a product, all of a sudden the line voltage is fluctuating a lot. And
You were chasing that for a minute.
So yeah, we were going back and forth, going, why? I'm looking at the line voltage, but then I would look down and I go, okay, the line voltage is right, and I would test it, and then something would change, and then I'd go, wait a minute, I'm hearing the printer printing.
Hey!
Would you stop printing for a second? I'm trying to test. He's like, oh, sorry. So the guy that was printing documents stopped printing for a sec so we could get a stable voltage and and do our.
You were like, please let me know when you need to print something first before you print it.
The same goes for, we have a heat gun that we use for heating up heat shrink.
Oh, sure,
For wiring assemblies and stuff.
Yeah.
Boy, does that thing, it just, the line voltage drops 5 volts in the test area when this guy is using this basically high caliber hair dryer.
Yeah, yeah. Simon, that is so awesome that you got yours and you're using it happily. I want to hear what you're doing, brother. Send me some files and stuff. So anyway, then are you going to choose?
No, I was
choose a thing.
Oh, you got
Simon got his gear, man.
Oh. All right, great.
He's making it sound good.
So what I do when I'm going to bias an amplifier of somebody else's, our procedures are already all locked down. and pretty stable. But when somebody else's gear comes in, or a vintage amp comes in and I'm doing for a friend, I will test the filament voltage.
Right.
And I will set
Yeah.
the variac so that the filament voltage is 6.3, and then I will examine what the variac says the input voltage is. And it should be between 115 and 125, and ideally I like to see it around 120, but older amplifiers, the line voltage will be calibrated based on a lower AC line voltage from days gone by. And so you'll see it more like 115, more 116. So that's a very important calculation to make before you start biasing. So because of that, for my purposes, the filament voltage is the most reliable reference voltage inside the chassis from which to set the variac. And in the case of Dave's amp, for example, 116 on the primary yields 6.3 AC on the power tubes. And why I want to see, there's all of the voltage have plus or minus 20% tolerance. That's just really typical. But I want to see 6.3 volts on the filament before I adjust the bias, because that's what the documentation is specified at. That tube is designed to be 6.3 volts, and all the test voltages and all the parameters that they've generated for that tube are based on it being 6.3 volts on the filament. So that will give you the most accurate reading about the performance of the tube and how it's behaving and where the bias should be set. And then after that, all bets are off. Somebody's going to take it out and they're going to plug it into, they're going to go to a club and start playing, and oh man, my amp sounds really anemic. And they're going to be on stage, and just before they started playing, they turned the lights down on the stage, and lo and behold, the AC outlets on the stage are also connected to the light dimmers. And so somebody turned the lights down 10%. They basically variac the entire stage. It happens all the
Oh, well, I just
time.
know the sonic result of it, having done a billion gigs.
Yeah.
What the hell just happened? I did sound fairly decent, at least as good as I possibly can, and then it's like, why? I'm not actually using a fuzz pedal.
Yeah,
Like,
and-
what happened?
And someday it may just come out that that's how the brown sound really got discovered.
Hey, who's Quentin James, man? Everybody's talking to Quentin. He's a new dude popping in here. Whoever you is, welcome. Do you know Quentin? Hi, Quentin. So you did that. You solved the printing problem. The line voltage was stable, and then what happened? Then you move the amp up to the way you would have biased it back in 1990-ish.
Well, that may have been the case,
Okay.
but in those days I might have been more inclined to just put it up on the scope and to bias it so that there's a minimum amount of crossover distortion. These days, I don't rely on crossover distortion as much. I depend more on voltage parameters and the stability of said parameters.
Okay.
So we make sure that our voltages are locked down, and our reference voltage is very specific, and we have charts for the voltage drop on the output transformer primaries of all of the products. So it's really easy to just go and check the voltage drop on the primaries to arrive not only at the proper bias voltage, but also as a confirmation of the behavior of the tubes. We buy tested tubes from the tube suppliers, tested and matched. We don't buy them tested and matched because we need to have them tested and matched specifically. We buy them tested and matched to save ourselves the time of doing the testing and matching. We could do it
Sure.
ourselves,
Who wants to do that?
but that's just grunt work that we don't really need to do
Yeah.
if the supplier is doing a good job of it. And
You don't want to have to make your own mayonnaise for your
and-
sub sandwiches.
Right, and normally we depend on, we would use a specific supplier or two suppliers, maybe three, but mostly two
Uh-huh.
main suppliers, and their testing is very consistent and very reliable, and so we just do a little quick once over, we spot check that.
Uh-huh.
And every once in a while we find a little discrepancy, but it's not a big deal. Most of the time they're right on, they're within, and for me, plus or minus 5 milliamps is more than sufficient. But, and usually the testing and matching is better than that. It's within 5 milliamps or better. It's usually within 3.
Okay.
Sometimes it's within 1, but generally it's within 3. And a lot of times for that variation is the supplier only cooks the tubes for a short amount of time before they do the test. So it actually doesn't get warm enough to really stabilize before they do their test. So sometimes if they are really, really busy, their warm-up time will decrease.
Uh-huh.
Well, in the last year or so, that has all gone off the rails because the suppliers were so busy just banging out tubes and reacting to screaming demand from suppliers to just get us tubes, to the point where their testing was getting sloppier and sloppier, and then it got to the point where, oh, our testing guy's got COVID, he's going to be gone for, okay, fine, just send him unmatched. We'll test him and match from here. And normally they're reliable enough that the fallout that we experience in doing the testing and matching ourselves is very low. In the last 6 months to a year, the fallout has increased exponentially. It's really increased a lot, which means that their QC procedures have been scaled back in the interest of just jamming out order fulfillment. And you see all that in
Well,
action.
when they have to smuggle the tubes.
Right. Well, you just see it in action when
suitcases.
when you see what are normally real sort of stable parameters going like this now. And we call them on it and they go, yeah, we're aware of that.
We told you.
Yeah,
we told you.
we expected you to come and hit us over the head with that, and we understand it, and of course send back all the ones that don't stand up to scrutiny. It's fine, and I'm glad that they say that to us. By the same token, I don't want to spend my time doing their QC for them. They should be paying me to do that if that's what I'm doing, but they don't, and that's just the state of the game right now. It's messy, and it's time consuming, and you just have to deal with it. So fortunately, we've got a lot of test parameters documented to the extent that we can use any tube from any supplier and have a general idea of where they're going to land and what the defect rate is going to be. But it is more time consuming, and it's not something we can't raise our prices to compensate for that. We could, but we don't, because it's not a reliable it's not a well justified reason for adjusting prices, because it's a parameter that's going to settle down and normal out. So if we raise the prices to compensate ourselves for the extra time and energy and expense that we go through to get rid of all the fallout of the tubes, our prices would be fluctuating like this all the time, and we can't have that. So it's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
We deal with it.
Right. Cool, Quentin. Well, you must be cool because everybody's vouching for you, and Scott's busting on you. So you must be a cool guy. Hey, what's up, Carlos? Now, but let's. What's going on in here? Let's show the amp and talk about what you thought when you were in there and stuff.
You mean right now?
Yeah.
Show the amp?
Yeah.
Well,
Can I hit the button?
Show the amp. Wrong button.
Womp womp. Is the thing up?
It is.
It is not switching.
Why is it not working? Might be sleeping. Try it again.
Okay. There. Look at that. All right, what do you have going on there?
Okay, so I have
That's the actual amp, everybody.
so I have a I have the amp opened up and ready to fly, and I have my digital voltmeter that I use for checking the voltage drop across the transformer primary to see where the bias is, and I have a voltmeter on the variac, which is the voltmeter, the orange one standing up on the left. That's telling me where the line voltage is on the variac. And right now it's reading 114. It's very hot here today, and the air conditioning is running, so when the air conditioning is running, it drops down to 14. And when the air conditioner shuts off, it'll bump up to 116 or so.
Oh, interesting. Because I can feel the AC right now.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You can probably hear it as a hiss on the microphone, too. So Dave says that he likes 30 milliamps
Okay.
on the amp. I like 35.
Okay.
30 milliamps yields a little tiny bit of crossover distortion. 35 gives us a more straight line. Why don't you pull up
Should we
that?
tell people, talk about crossover distortion for a
Yeah,
second?
why don't you pull up that little
Little graphy
the
graph?
graph? Yeah. Right. So that's a waveform, an audio waveform. Just assume that it's a kilohertz. And normally what you would see with a properly biased amp is the ramp going from the top of the wave going down to the bottom of the wave should be a straight diagonal line.
Right.
But this has a little step on here, and you'll see where those two steps on the trailing and leading end of the waveform transition are identified as crossover distortion. That's what's happening when in a push-pull amplifier, the hump on the left, on the far left of the graph, is one tube, and the hump on the next hump on the bottom of the graph is the other tube. So as the signal as the power that's being transferred to the output transformer transitions from coming from the top tube to coming from the bottom tube, the crossover region is the line in the center. And there should be no step in the crossover region unless the amp is overbiased. And then there will be that step. And what that is the transition from one tube turning off and the other tube turning on, and then that tube turning off, and then the original tube turning on again, and so on and so on and so on. So the idea is to get a seamless transition from on to off to on to off of each power tube. So when you set, in this particular amp at this particular voltage, when you set it to 35 milliamps, you will have a straight diagonal line.
But let me ask you this. Once I remember what the hell I was going to ask. What is the audible result of crossover distortion?
The audible result of that is you actually hear a little fizz in the sound.
And is that desirable to some people?
Very much. It's probably the key component of a rectifier amp.
That raspy top?
Yeah. Because the thing about the rectifier amp that people hear and like is not just because it has tube rectifiers.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because of the plate voltage necessary. It's a combination of all these things. Rectifier has slightly reduced filament voltage. It doesn't have a really high plate voltage. They do, it's well known that they tend to cold bias the tubes, and they call that the rectifier characteristic. And when you switch from tube rectifier to solid state rectifier, it erases some of that crossover notch, but not all of it. It still leaves a fair amount. So when you're saying, oh, I like that cleaner, tighter sound of the solid state rectifier, yes, it is cleaner and tighter, but it still has a significant amount of crossover distortion, because if they got rid of all of it, the fizz would go away. And the fizz is part of the thing that accentuates that modern, high gain distortion sound that the amp produces. So there is a reason to have that.
Okay.
But an excessive amount is what makes the amp sound kind of pinched and fizzy.
Okay. There's a question here. Hip Metal Works asks, does the time gap correlate to sag?
No, the sag is a different function. The sag is when the power supply current capacity is being maxed out.
Okay.
You're gonna turn off that graph.
You want the graph off
Yeah,
now?
we don't need the graph anymore.
Graph be gone. You ready?
Yeah.
Poof.
So you
want to see us again?
yeah, the
Hi, us.
the tube rectifier in a rectifier amp will have some insertion loss between the power supply and the power tubes.
What is that insertion loss?
Well, I call it insertion loss, but it's actually the sag is caused by the fact that there's a voltage drop in a rectifier tube that is less apparent in solid state rectifiers.
That makes sense.
Right. So you can design a transformer to sag. We call it sag. Transformer engineers call it regulation. So when an engineer is designing a power transformer, or when an engineer is specifying the behavior that they want out of the power transformer to the design engineer of the transformer, you can tell him you want 5% regulation, you want 10% regulation.
So do all solid state rectifiers have voltage loss to some extent?
Yeah,
Can
they
you
do have a
them?
voltage drop across them, but it's way lower than the voltage drop across a vacuum tube diode.
Sure,
It's
sure.
still a diode. They're
I
both
just wondered if
diodes.
you could design them so that there was none whatsoever, and it'd just be the fastest feeling amp that you ever played.
No, there's always going to be a little bit of a voltage drop.
Okay.
But you can accentuate the sensation of speed and tightness by
How would you do that?
by
Where would you-
increasing the filter capacity of the filter capacitors. So the voltage drop across the rectifiers will cause the voltage to reduce a little bit. However, more filter capacitors are storage capacitors. They're storing voltage. If
That's why you don't touch them.
If they can store a lot of voltage, then they'll store voltage that will compensate for the voltage drop across the rectifiers.
Got it.
And
Got it. Oh,
so
okay. Yeah.
that's why our amplifiers, a lot of people consider them stiff or tight or dry or blah, 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 blah. What they're experiencing is that more responsive.
It's a rack and pinion steering.
Exactly. So in vintage amps, of course, there's a certain amount of a well-established sag, and then in monitor amps that are accentuated in the sag, you can overdo it, intentionally overdo it. You can set it wherever you want.
Yeah.
You can build in voltage drop in the transformer but effectively lowering the regulation of the transformer. You can make it so that when you get close to the maximum current handling capacity of the transformer, the voltage actually starts going down. When that happens, the transformer will start getting hotter, because in order to get what you do to compensate for the transformer to cause it to have less regulation, is you will use thinner wire, which has higher DC resistance, which will cause the voltage to drop more when you put a load on it.
Oh yeah.
And because it's acting like a resistor, it has a resistance, and when you have a resistance and a current, you also have a power component, and that power component is the dissipation of the wire as more voltage is getting dropped across it as a result of the resistance in the wire. So a less regulated transformer will have thinner wire and therefore more DC resistance in the copper, which will cause the copper to dissipate more energy in the form of heat inside the core of the transformer, and thus it will get progressively hotter. So if you're going to design a transformer like that, you also have to sometimes give it a bigger core, or put it in an amplifier where there's more space around it, or a fan to help it dissipate that additional heat. And so it's a stew, like everything else in an amp. It's a stew.
Hey, here's a cool question.
All right.
My Synergy Deliverance 2 has more sizzly top end than the Pitbull module. Is that partly because of crossover distortion?
No, there's no crossover distortion in the module.
That would be in the Synergy
What
module.
you're
the power
hearing
section.
in there is the behavior of the cathode follower that's driving the tone controls. Now, most high gain amps have a cathode follower in it, and the cathode follower has a particular kind of distortion characteristic. When you max out the headroom of that stage, it has this unique sort of non-symmetrical clipping behavior, and right at the onset of that clipping, it makes this funny little zzz.
Huh.
Now,
Can you do that again?
zzz. You happy now?
One more time.
You know what? I'm getting close to wanting another, not only a glass of sparkling water, but if we're going to keep this up, I'm starting to crave a shot of,
Getting ready to drink.
a shot of that.
Guys, we're sober right now.
Yeah.
Has this ever happened? Have we ever made it this deep into a show?
Maybe. At any rate, we were talking about the cathode follower distortion.
Amanda needs some zzz.
Yeah, really. Now, the reason that you hear it more on the Deliverance is because the Deliverance amp sort of accentuates some of the top end clarity that oh, nice. Whatever you did.
I have a ton of pedals at my feet that I've never had before.
Yeah, and one of them is the camera switcher. And
Yeah.
if you hit,
Ready?
If you hit that's
Huzzah.
right. Now, if you hit the signal coming from the laptop, it sets up a feedback loop. This is video feedback. So hit that button that you accidentally hit.
I don't know what I hit. Was it
try
3?
try that one? Yeah. See?
Whoa!
That's the video equivalent of cranking up your guitar and sticking it in front of your speakers.
Yeah. I like that. That's the Alice in Wonderland mode.
All right. So anyway, back to the cathode follower. Most of the time in a high gain circuit, you roll off some of the high frequency contact of the cathode follower so that you don't hear the onset of its distortion. But if you listen to a vintage amp, if you listen to an old Marshall or an old, not necessarily an old Highway, but if you listen to old Marshall or an old Tweed amp, you'll hear that same thing. The most of the time you're cranking it up past the threshold of that
You're gonna
that
mask it?
distortion. You're going to mask it a little bit. But in the Deliverance module, when you're using the lower gain channel, it becomes more apparent because the excessive gain is not masking the sound of it. So when you're trying to set it up to be clean, the Deliverance module isn't really a clean, dirty module. It's a lower gain, higher gain module.
Yeah,
so if you're trying to make the Deliverance channel sound clean, it's a little more difficult to do that. That said, the module has been updated, so there's a little mod that sort of ameliorates that a little bit and sounds a little smoother. So that's a mod that can be done, and the newer modules will be less apparent. But it's really it's the Deliverance. The bottom row on the Deliverance is not a clean channel, so you're going to hear a little bit of fizz just at the onset of distortion. If you set it real clean, it's going to become apparent.
Zzz.
Zzz.
Oh, look, reinforcements.
Ooh.
Why, thank you.
All right, check this out.
Okay,
So-
do you want to intro this? Because I know what this is, I think, but I don't really know how to describe it.
Well, first
I know
of
the
all,
big headline.
First of all, turn the glass around so you can see the label. These are glasses from my first trip to Germany in about 1991, and I grabbed glasses from every place that I went to, every bar that I went to in Germany. I grabbed glasses from. These are the last two remaining ones that haven't broken. So cheers. And we're drinking beer for the first time. How about we're having
hoppy.
we're having a commemorative beer to commemorate the Guitar Summit that just happened in Mannheim, Germany this weekend.
This is an IPA. It has to be an IPA. It's super
This
hoppy.
is an IPA.
Uh-huh.
It is Glutenberg. It is a gluten-free IPA.
I wouldn't guess that.
Wrap your
Hot damn.
little mind around that.
Buckwheat and corn beer?
Mm-hmm.
Millet? Buckwheat and corn beer, y'all.
This is of all the gluten-free beers I've tried. This is a good one.
I've never tried one. This is actually really good.
Yeah.
Pleasantly surprised. Oh, the aftertaste is interesting. Carlos doesn't want the mod.
Okay. You don't really need it, but I did tweak it a little bit. It's very subtle. I actually did it for Dean DeLeo, and he liked it so much that I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do the next run like that.
Oh,
and,
nice. Oh,
you-
wee beastie, Bimo? Excellent. I need that again. Wait,
Yeah.
what's diarrhea in a can, Scott? What we're drinking right now?
Actually, if you have a problem with gluten, you would get diarrhea as a side effect.
That's what I thought. Like the reverse of it
Yeah,
would
this
be.
would be the
This
anti.
would be the
the anti-diarrhea.
the amelioration
Yeah.
diarrhea effect. Well,
That sounds highly unmarketable.
unmarketable. Oh, you can't do corn. Oh, okay. It's always something. We all got something.
It's always something.
Yeah.
So, so we had fun examining the amp and testing everything inside it, and having a look at an amp that I haven't looked inside of for 30 years, and
I'm just gonna hold this.
and then we decided that we would bring it to the show and play it for you, so you could hear how it sounds set up a couple of different ways. And I'm set up to be able to tweak the bias and change the power tubes and variac the amp and all of that. At the same time, I thought it would be really fun to just throw 3 or 4 crescent wrenches into the works at the same time, because why not? Because it's not enough to just hook it up and go, this is what this is. I have to make it as convoluted as possible, so you have to come back and watch the show 3 or 4 times to wrap your head around it.
Yeah.
So what I did was I set Dave's 1968 JMP and my
50 watt,
50 watt and my treasured 1970, I think,
72.
50 watt DR 504 similarly.
Very.
So the idea was that there's people that sort of get that there's the Marshall sound and there's the high watt sound, and never the twain shall meet, and that the reason our amps sound like more in the direction of high watts is because they're based on high watts, and the reason Friedman's amps sound more like Marshalls because they're based on Marshalls. And so I'm here to sort of blow that up a little bit by showing you what it is, how I use a high watt or used a high watt, and what I wanted out of it. And you're going to find out that the thing that I was looking for was much more subtle and indirect than the high watt's clean and the Marshall's dirty. That's just such an oversimplification. And I'm going to prove it. So what I did was I have both heads set up for the same amount of gain and volume going into a switcher. So I'm switching between the outputs of the two amplifiers, the speaker outputs.
Mm-hmm.
The output of the switcher normally would go to a cabinet, but I'm sending it to
Mars.
I'm sending it to the power station. And then
But you're not done there, are you?
No, I'm not done there. Then, so that they both have the same reactive load and can be heard through the PLIR and an early 70s greenback slant cab, Marshall cab.
Mm-hmm.
However, the output, the speaker out of the power station goes into the amp in of the power
The
load.
PLIR, yeah.
And then the cab through of the power load goes to the cabinet.
Yeah.
Why did I do that? Because now the load that in the power load, it's got its own reactive load like the power station does. So it's the behavior of the load in the power load that is what gets sent to the IR loader to set how the IR behaves, not just sounds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In this case, I'm using the cab as a through, so now the sound going to the reactive load coming out of the speaker is modified by the reactive load in the power station. However, the sound that is driving the IR in the power load is derived from the speaker behavior in the 412 cab.
Mm-hmm.
It's providing the reactive load as far as the PLIR is concerned.
Right.
So we're bypassing the reactive load in the PLIR. It's what's coming off the speaker that's driving the IR and sending that directly into the stream. So I've got a mic on the cab
SM57.
that's going that's panned left, panned right, it's panned one way or another, and the signal coming out of the power load is panned the opposite way. So just for giggles and shits and fun,
We're going to drink beer.
and just
buy.
just to drive everybody nuts.
Let's just be done. Let's leave. Leave him hanging. Cliffhanger.
All right, so
Toodles.
before we get into screwing around with the bias of the amp and all that, I basically have the amp set the way Dave likes it at 30 milliamps. It's got JJ power tubes in it. The high watt doesn't have an adjustable bias.
Mm-hmm.
Consequently, it's set at the idle current that Dave Reeves had intended it to operate at. This explodes the myth that you need to put a voltage doubler in a high watt for it to get adequate bias, blah, 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 because voltage and new tubes can't take and blah. It's all crap. It's all crap. Current manufactured tubes can perfectly handle the voltage, the plate voltage of a high watt any day of the week. And it doesn't need to have the bias modified by a bias mod in order to extend the life of the tubes. That doesn't have anything to do with it. So Dave's amp is set to 30 milliamps the way he likes it. My amp is set to factory, which consequently lands at right around 35 milliamps or 70% plate dissipation. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about that. Should we, what do we want to do? Do we want to just play it first and have fun with that, or what do we want to do?
I feel like you have all these teacups balanced in your head about what the hell you want to do over here more
I
than I
don't
do.
know what the hell I want to do. I just want to have fun.
If I can assist you in pulling the rabbit out of the damn hat, I will do so. But
Well, I think the thing to do then would be, why don't you just play?
okay, I'm gonna
And
bang on some chords.
I think that we should use the humbucker guitar first because so that we can hear, because we're going to crank the amp a bit.
Okay.
We're going to hear it in here through the 412 cab at a very low volume because we're using the power station to control the volume.
Okay.
And so what you're going to hear is coming through the mic and coming through the power load.
Okay.
And we'll see how that works. Now, I didn't spend any time really dialing in the sounds coming through the stream to get it perfect or whatever. I kind of skid past that part. So if it sounds a little fizzy or ratty because of the mic placement, you're welcome to
Definitely chime in.
chime in about that, and I'll do what I think I might be able to do to ameliorate that, but we'll see. So we don't really need to look at this right at the moment. We just need to play. So we can either play first through the high watt and then go to the Marshall. We can start. I think it'd be probably more fun to play through the Marshall first and then switch to the high watt. I don't know. What do you think? What do you guys think? What do you want to hear first?
While they're chiming in, what they want to hear first. Do you know what the pickups are in here? We got a question from Eric.
They're just the stock pickups that came with the guitar, which are, I don't know what they're just standard P whatever PAF style buck hummers.
Peacoats.
Yeah.
David thinks it needs a Floyd. We got 2 votes for a Marshall. Just fire the damn thing up. I'm gonna just bang on some chords because we want to hear the amplifiers and how they compare and contrast.
We have a cable conflict.
What do I need to do?
Just need to get it. Oh, there we go. All right.
Oh, and then Austin says high watt.
Put it around. Put it over your head so that it's kind of down on the front of the floor instead of behind you.
Make sure it doesn't knock over the bureau.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I've got the channels jacked on the Marshall as well as the high watt. So you got to switch to 2 there.
Okay.
2, a 1, a 2, and then we turn this on, and then we turn this on. Okay, let's see, answer to a question, what IR is it? We're using the, we have the cab connected to the PLIR, which defeats the reactive load inside. The IR that we're using is the, it's the Sound City 412 cab?
Sound City 412
With the
F70s.
F70s, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
The high watt doesn't have any more gain than a normal high watt. It's just cranked into a reactive load, and that's what high watts do when you have them on a on an attenuator, on being able to control the volume down to where you can actually hear the harmonic distortion characteristics that are the signature of the power amp behavior. Not most people that have a 100 watt high watt never get to experience that because A, it's too loud, or B, if you're using something less than a really good reactive transparent attenuator, you basically just hear everything all mucked up. And high watts generally don't like attenuators, especially passive ones. So something like the Power Station is like one of the first available attenuators that actually serve a high watt well. So that's what you're hearing. Turn the bright volume to 10 and the bass volume off and everything else on 10 with the treble at 8. I mean, we could do this all night long. So Dave, you're saying on your amp, turn the bright volume to 10, the bass volume off, and everything on, okay. So we're gonna turn the bass volume off.
Yep.
And you're saying full right hand sweep except treble?
Right, and then treble at 8.
Swing, 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 and turn treble at 8.
Yeah.
This is Dave's,
Setting, but not Dave's guitar.
it's not Dave's guitar, but it's Dave's preferred
Two.
setting.
Sounds pretty glorious.
You know, I don't think anybody heard that because I didn't have the thing on it, so do it again.
Oh.
I'm going to do the same thing. These are Dave's settings applied to the high watt. Okay, what do you think of that? It's a little more forward on the upper range.
Total PV Bandit 65. Absolutely. That's exactly what I thought.
Okay, so now I'm doing a full right hand sweep on the high watt.
Okay.
Well, before I had the normal volume turned all the way down, but on high watts, the bright channel is much brighter on a Marshall, so it actually needs the normal volume. On a Marshall, the normal volume has too much bass; it could be flubby, but the normal volume on the high watt doesn't. So you can actually get away with turning it up there so that it gives you that chunk when you're choking the strings. Then the bottom end really snaps out there. It doesn't happen with the normal volume down. So what I did was I just dimed the normal volume as well, the bright volume, and then I turned the presence down a small amount because the presence on the high watt is also a little brighter than the Marshall, so it can be a little bit too fizzy.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, if I spent enough time on it, when we were first setting it up, I was showing Joe, and he was like, "Okay, which one is which?" Because I like to play those little games, and I want to hear stage. What is 60s gent? I need to know what that is, 'cause I don't know.
60s gent. Well, there is no such thing. You have to invent it.
Oh, okay. Well, do a little bit of your blasting, and then I'll play through it.
Okay. You're just wanting.
Okay, the level, we can't turn it up louder because the level that we're sending to the stream is about max. If we turn it up hotter, it'll overdrive the stream. So you're just going to turn your speakers up or hook up to some speakers that are louder if you want to hear it louder. So let me have a whack at that.
Yeah.
MC5, huh? He's calling 60s gents MC5. So
Hey, I'm going to run out of the room for a second. I'll be
that's
right back.
something that I suppose I can relate to. Okay, now that I realize I haven't turned on the amp mics, I'll do that. This is what's called getting distracted. All right, that'll be just about enough of that for a minute. I think you get the gist. They have slightly different characteristics, and now we know what Dave's amp sounds with his ideal setting. So what I'm going to do next now...
Killer. It's killer.
What I'm going to do next now is I'm going to do what we said we're going to do. We're going to drop Dave's amp down. Yeah, the tubes are warming up. We are beating it up a little bit. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set the Variac to 90 and turn the bias up to 50 milliamps where Dave likes it. And I'm going to set it to 116 volts because that's where, with the bias maxed at 160 volts, the tubes are running at 6.3 volts filament. And when you max the bias pot, that's running the tubes at 50 milliamps at 90 volts. Okay? So when I say the tube's at 6.3 volts, when I variac it down to 90, then the filament voltage on the tubes will be 5 volts, just roughly 5. So if you want, you could switch to the picture of me doing that over here.
I will do that because...
Assuming that it works. Yeah, it worked, great. Okay, so I got the variac here. I've got the AC voltmeter here. And I already know pretty much how it's going to behave and what the settings are, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. With as much as I can take all the readings that I want, I already know that I just turn this up to this, and just to verify that I've got the bias voltage that Dave specified. I'm just going to read it off the grids because now I remember where it was from the other day. And that would be right here, and that would be minus 33 volts. And the AC voltage on the filaments should be 5 something. And 5 right on the nose. My memory isn't as bad as I thought. I was having a little bit of problem remembering small details after I got COVID. But my brain seems to be coming back to normal operation now, and I'm not dropping out so many words.
You just think it's coming back.
Yeah, I just think...
You actually sound the same as you always did.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Which isn't a compliment.
All right.
I'm saying that because you're over there. You can't swap me.
We're at 90, right on the nose on the Variac. Everything is all left set the same. And just for fun, let's have a look at what the plate voltage is. Variac down to 90 volts AC. We go here, we go here. We've got, well, you can do it. 360 volts on the plate, and 90 volts on AC.
Dave wants the jumper out of his amp.
The jumper is coming out. That's the kind of guy I am. Dave says take out the jumper, out goes the jumper. And here we go. just for fun, we're going to run the Strat into this. The expression on your face just gave it all away right there.
Well, most of my expression is like, I don't remember how to play the fucking guitar. It's not mine, and it feels really weird. But I mean, I haven't been watching the comments here, but are people really hearing big differences, or are they kind of hearing that they're closer than maybe originally anticipated?
Well, yeah, the chewy bit, that's true. Of course, the high watt isn't variac, so it's
Oh, interesting.
it's not
That's
going to be
right.
as chewy. Very early on, I experimented with variacs with the high watt and with the Marshall, and the by itself, it's a cool sound, but you know what happens after you set the amp up like that and get that sound, when you go to record it, of course, you add elements in the recording process that sort of catch the subtleties, like the beefiness of the low end and things like that. So, and you also put a little bit of compression on the top that fattens up the very top of the notes. By itself, raw like this, it's a little anemic sounding for me at 90 volts. And when I go back to the high watt with the Strat and listen to him play, I hear the thicker, rounder notes on the top, and the beefiness doesn't come into play until you back off on the string attack a little bit. So that's just the thing that I've always sort of done to kind of play with the dynamics of the high watt, is just understand that it does have another sort of level of dynamics,
Yeah.
that you can play with. But of course, you take a sound like that, like Dave's amp, variac, and then you, for live purposes, you reamp that into big power amps and into big cabinets. Then you get this big roar behind you, which is killing. Of course, you can do that with lots of different amps. So then it really just comes down to the voicing. Where is the treble and the middle and the bass voicing relative to the two different styles of the amps? And you can get a certain amount of squish, but if, for me, too much squish equals a loss of dynamic detail. So I always gravitate towards a little bit more detail and a little bit more note value. But there's no denying that this is a really good sounding amp as it sits, no matter that it's, like Dave said, the power transformer has been changed, so what? It's got a good, it's got a nice voltage range on it. I have another friend that's got a same year of amp that somebody replaced the power transformer in, and it is a really anemic sounding transformer. So even if you don't get an amp like this stock, if it's got the right balance of components in it that give you the stew that you want, that's really what you want. And it's almost like better that it isn't stock, because then you don't sort of feel reticent about messing with it and dialing it in, which of course somebody had done in the past and went way too far, and then we brought it back, and on and on and on. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it does have a little bit more plate voltage than a stock 50, and that's what I was basically saying. Was, a stock 50. I think this one, when I had it biased to 35 milliamps as opposed to your 30, and checked it out, I was getting 450 volts, which usually on a typical 50 is more like 430, I think. And it doesn't sound like much, but 20 volts do make a difference. And yeah, of course, anytime you take two different kinds of voicings and put them in a stereo mix, of course things get huge, because what happens is the amp that has this sort of character, chewiness, the saturation, and blah blah blah, together with an amp that's got detail and girth and sparkle, you can't do any better than that. No matter what you do with an amp, you're never going to modify that single amp to be all the things that you want it to be.
No.
There's always going to be.
No.
You're always going to mix and match and play around with things like that. I mean, that's really what guitar players do. That's why gear. That's why gas exists, because we can never get enough of that stuff, and we never will get enough of that stuff. Well, let's see. So stock is more like 420, exactly. Yeah, 420. I thought 430, so that's in the ballpark. Well, of course, as amps weren't 50s, they're 100s. So the plate voltage is going to be a little different. Dave might be able to answer that. 463 to 465. Yeah, that's what I recall being sort of typical for a 1969 or 70 amp. 465. I had a 70 JMP. It was the loudest thing. It was glorious. It was just the loudest, punchiest thing.
What guitar were you playing with it?
Oh, the Esquire. Yeah, and it was stupendous. And I had gone through a Marshall period where I tried a bunch of different things, and when I landed on the 70, it's like went, okay, this is what everybody must have been talking about,
okay,
because there wasn't anything else I heard that sounded like that. And I think the early Ultraleads, that when the Ultralead first came out, it had about 465 on the plate, and I think that's really the magic voltage for a 100-watt amp. And I wouldn't not do that because of how long the tubes will last, because that isn't really what it's about to me. The tubes will last. If you put a good set of tubes in, test them, they will probably last just as well as anything else. Yeah, Scott, the Major would have had around between 700 and 800 volts. That would have been normal. Also, that was why they blew up so often, because normally if you look at the spec sheets for a KT88, when you run the voltage that high, you're running the screen voltage at 50% of that value. So you would have 700 volts on the plates, or according to the specs, which would be at 100 watts, so that would be under load. According to the specs, you'd be at 600 volts plate, 300 volts screen to get 100 watts out of a pair of KT88s. But the Marshall Major used an ultralinear design. Now, in an ultralinear design, the person that designed the ultralinear circuit said you would run the plate voltage at 60% of the normal value that you would run the plates at. So that's why you would see an ultralinear amp that puts out 60 watts like a Dynaco Mark III stereo, the monoblock from the early 60s. That's an ultralinear design, and it runs a pair of 6550s at 60 watts, right? So it's running a lower plate voltage and an ultralinear, which is the screen powered by a 40% tap on the transformer primary. They weren't meant to be run at the high plate voltages specified in the KT88 specs. If you look at the KT88 specs, there is a voltage specification for ultralinear operation, which is way, way less than, 800 or 700, or what they quote 600 on the specs. It would be more like 400. But that isn't what they did on the Marshall Major. They put it way up there, ran it ultralinear, and it worked on the bench, and they figured, well, okay. The problem is, it is okay until you push it up to the point where you get power tube distortion. And the minute that you hit power tube distortion, the screens on the power tubes just start drawing exponentially more current than the 10 milliamps that they typically draw. And that would cause the tubes to fry. And they tried to compensate for that by changing 10-watt screen grid resistors to 200, I think they were 25 or 50-watt screen resistors, these big things with ceramic cores on them, huge resistors to try to, it wasn't like, oh, we got the voltage way too high, let's cool it down. No, let's just put bigger screen resistors on it so that when it's drawing 10 times the current it's supposed to, they don't fry. That was like, let's make sure that this A-bomb doesn't trigger until at least they get through with their set. Then it can go up in flames and it's all right. They can bring it to us and we can replace them all and get it back running again. That was the mentality on the Major. You could not run that where the screens were pulling current, or the tubes would just like go ballistic. And that's what they did. That was like the signature of the Marshall Major was that the power tubes were intended to be bottle rockets in the amp. We did the bias.
Yeah.
We did all that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
we did all the things.
I think we did all the stuff.
We did all the things, man.
And we didn't take 4 hours to do it.
We didn't. And I didn't wind up on the floor.
That all felt really productive, and I think we struck on some key things that we wanted to make clear. And Amanda says all the things were did, and I agree.
Yeah. Should we get the hell out?
Yeah. Thank you for hanging with us, and we're gonna put our heads together and try to figure out what we're gonna do next. That's fun. Actually, we got a couple of ideas, and we'll fine-tune those and refine those ideas, and we'll come back. If you guys want to put in the comments some of the things that you would like to see us do, I'm happy to entertain those questions, and maybe we'll get some more news on what the status of tubes is over the next the next couple of weeks, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks to do it all over again. So again, thanks for the hang.
Whoa!
Oh, what do we got?
Food stuff.
We got food stuff, so we're definitely out of here now.
I love
Thank
that.
you all. Love you all. Take care of yourselves,
Mhm.
and come and see us again real soon, will you?